Well, after about a year's break, the podcast for the Wealthy Ironworker is picking back up again. So in this podcast episode here, it's not going to be very long, but what I want to do is explain why I ended up taking a break, and also some of the things that I believe are going to be very interesting that I've got planned that I have kind of coming up. So first up, why I took a break. Well, some of you may know this from a personal perspective, but about November 9th to be exact, my 24-year-old son passed away. And as you can imagine, that takes the wind out of anybody's sails. It certainly did for me. Some people in the midst of grief, what they do is they end up, just kind of diving headfirst into whatever hobby they have. And that hobby then becomes a significant distraction because anybody that's been through grief, they understand intuitively that you don't want to sit and ruminate and to continually toil in your mind about what happened, what could you have done differently? Is it your fault? I mean, there's a whole litany of things that you think about. Well, that's not particularly where I wanted to reside in. I do appreciate the distractions, my distractions, but the podcast was not going to be one of them. It doesn't take a whole lot of work to do this podcast, to be honest with you. It takes time to sit down here, to work out in my own mind the material or what I want to talk about, or quite frankly, who I want to talk with. And then, I don't have to do any transcripts or anything like that. I just, give me 30 minutes and a monologue and I can sit here and regurgitate whatever I need to do. So it wasn't that it took an awful lot of effort on my part or a lot of intentionality. I really enjoy talking. There's an awful lot that I think I can contribute to the particular space that I'm engaged in. It's just that there was a lot more going on at the time and something needed to go. And this is, well, although it is a hobby, right? I do talk about how if you're looking to start a podcast up, you need to, number one, you need to be bringing value to whoever you think is going to listen to you. And secondly, you need to have staying power, right? You don't want to come into this thinking that you're going to make a ton of money right out of the get-go, because statistically, it's not going to happen. What's really going to take place is that you're going to have to do this from a hobby perspective. And you know what? If you get big, that's great. So this was a hobby, and it's a fun one, and I really enjoy it. But it took the wind out of my sails. Here I am talking about, life-changing things from a podcast perspective, and talking about how you should invest into your family and, not leave them on the altar of the pursuit, not even the obtainment, but the pursuit of success. And, I found it very difficult even thinking about these things, while in the process of just effectively kind of, when it first happens, it's like grief comes in waves and you're sitting here thinking, well, instead of ruminating on all this other stuff, it's like, it's very difficult to sit here and think about complex, deep and nuanced stuff. It's just difficult. It was difficult for me. So that's the first reason that I'll tell you. The first reason, obviously, stemming from a grief perspective, that is the reason why. The second reason, and it piggybacks off of the first actually, is that I knew that whenever I decide to kick this podcasting back off, that I'm going to really kick it back off. And so I didn't want to, that at the first sign of, oh, let's go ahead and do a podcast episode, that I do it. And then I have a month or so in between because I've lost, not interest. I've never lost interest, and I probably never will, quite frankly, because there's an awful lot to talk about and there's a lot of interesting people to talk to. But it's more along the lines of losing steam, right? You make sure that if you unfurl your sails from a pirate perspective or a shipping perspective, that you're going to keep those things full of wind, and you're not doing it. And then you're going to have these periods where, I just don't have any wind in my sails to record podcast episodes. I want to return to some form of consistency, some form of continual communication between me and the audience, whether you listen or you watch, depending on how you consume your podcast content. Holding off for a while, right? While I'm just sitting here kind of hanging out, continually, making different connections, toiling it over in the back of my mind. All right, I need to get it going. I need to get it going, making connections and whatnot. And it just seems there's a few things that are going on, which we'll get to in a second. But there's a few things going on that are lending themselves to what I'll say is a more perpetual, continual podcast episode release. I've got a lot to talk about. And for those of you who may have been listening for a while now, and if you read anything on the website, you intuitively know that this podcast is an extension of what I write/do on the website. And there's a lot of material there that has not been turned into podcast episodes yet. And I have a whole lot more that's planned out as well. I'm a big fan of the written word. As a matter of fact, I prefer the written word over like, let's say, podcasting. But I understand. I intuitively know that individuals will listen to a podcast where they may not open up a website and read a substantive, life-changing article. So there's that. There is a minor third one that I could toss out there, and it's that even today, the the smaller short form content I have never really been good at. And I knew that when I started that I was going to have to at some point, get into that dynamic range. Even now, I still know that I have to do it. And I really just don't enjoy short form content from what I do because it's like, it's akin to taking long, robust, substantive, and nuanced perspectives and conversations, and then it's trying to distill it down into these short form contents, where you're just going, "Hey, here's a bite-sized nugget." And what it feels like you're doing, at least to me anyway, is it's like I'm reversing what it should be, which is I should be going from short form sound bite stuff to long form, robust conversations, because then you can fully explore either a principle or an idea or something to that effect. And instead, what I'm doing is I'm taking longer form content and I'm trying to put it out in short form content. And I know, intuitively, I know that from a marketing perspective, you're battling obscurity. I'm aware of that. I've monitored social media for a little bit on different, different fronts, and I'm aware of that. But what also irritates me, at least me anyway, and this is why I put myself in there, is that when I see these short form pieces of content that you can clearly tell they came from a longer discussion or something to that effect, and you don't get a full point out of it. And I don't know if it was done with AI or if it was done with, somebody intentionally did it, or they just chopped it up and said, well, let's just send out as much as possible. If I can't watch a short form content piece and get something out of it, meaning I don't have to go and search for the next short form content piece to get the rest of the first point that never really got to a point in the first place, that's irritating to me. And so it's a long answer to say that I know that the short form content has its purpose, but there is something to be said about the long form conversation, right? And then also when it comes to the short form stuff, the hesitancy there, right? We're just kicking the podcast back off is, okay, I know short form content is valuable, but that's more work on me, right? Because I need to go through, if I have this mindset, then I need to go through and find what I'll say are these sound bites that are worth sharing out. I can condense a really good point into like a minute or so and put it out there. That takes more work on my part. And on top of that, short form content it's a double-edged sword to a degree, because what it does is it shortens your attention span because everybody's doom scrolling. That's the phrase that I use. People doom scroll, and Every single person that has a cell phone is susceptible to it. And what are you doing? You're shortening your attention span when what I'm doing with the long form content is seeking to expand your attention span, your thought process, and how, you might contemplate or think about something or whatever the case may be. And so the difficulties then, right? The seemingly double-edged sword, and then pile on top of all of that the fact that short form content is designed and or set up to promote two very specific types of genre, if you will, and that is the sexually provocative and the humorous. Now, you'll never see anything from a sexual provocative perspective on this website or podcast. I can tell you that for a fact. I really have very little use for that. But humor does have its place. And quite frankly, we would probably be a lot better off if we laughed a lot more. But it's very difficult to compete when you're talking very serious topics. It's very difficult to compete with, excuse me, with and or against, if you will, for the algorithm and all that kind of stuff to get down into, let's say, the nitty gritty and have this specific perspective. And you're trying to educate and or entertain, maybe edutain, right? That smashing of the words and trying to bring, nuanced perspectives. But at the end of the day, short form content, I knew and still know that, if I really want to supermarket, I'm going to have to probably get into it more, which takes more of my time. And it's also one of the reasons why I had pushed off restarting the podcast, is how I'll say it. And then there's some more smaller, really incidental stuff. I have a PC. I didn't buy this thing. I inherited it from my son, and I had to set it up. And the monitor is nice. It's very big. It's nice. It's, everything like that. But it doesn't have a camera. So I'm using my iPhone. It's iPhone 11, I think, and that is the camera that I'm using. I had to navigate through all that, get that set up, and the next big thing, next piece of hardware that I'm gonna end up getting is probably gonna be another camera, like one that stays in here, or maybe I can even take it out on the job site and record, different things. And there's just a whole long litany of things that just kind of come together and compile, and quite frankly, conspire to keep me from starting a podcast again. But this podcast episode that you are listening to is my attempt to telling you that we are kicking this thing back off. It is time to get out. It is time to, let's say, just, I need a little bit more direction. And quite frankly, some of the people who are looking for, let's say, thought processes and things that are going to change their own paradigms and looking to be educated, they need somebody to do what they need to do, right? I can't just nothing's going to happen if I don't do anything. And so I've been itching to get back behind the microphone, and this is the shot across the bow, if you will, to say this is what's going to happen. Now, having said all of that, because that's the first part, now I want to get into the second part, which is what you can look forward to. I'm going to tip my hat just a little bit and tell you some of the things that I have going on. First, I plan on having a set of financial conversations, and this is the interesting part, with a licensed financial professional who is also a union member. Now, for those of you who listen and are not union, this may not matter to you, but I strongly urge that you listen. And here's why. Because it's going to highlight, we're going to explore a whole litany of things. But one of the things I want to build upon is the way that union individuals are paid, the pay structure as in comparison to the non-union pay structure. And because I think that's one of the things that you miss, and you don't understand just how good you potentially could have it, right? And you don't know what you don't know. And so one of the things that we're embarking on in this financial discourse is that we're going to explore that. We're going to talk about a whole litany of various subjects that many of, those of you in the trades, those of you who are union tradesmen, you don't know where to look to get any of this information. And what I mean is, okay, let's talk about what is an annuity. And why is it? If you go to a licensed financial professional, for the most part, the idea that they have of an annuity is not the same thing as the annuity that you, the pipe fitter or electrician or ironworker, has. It's not the same thing. And the reason I know this is because when several years ago, when my wife and I visited a financial professional, told him I have an annuity, and it was very difficult to explain exactly what it is because they have a specific picture and it's not what it is. And so it's a bit different, but you may not know that either, right? There's an old saying, you don't know what you don't know. So one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to have a series of financial conversations. You might see things like, what is an annuity? We're definitely going to be talking about what pensions are. We're definitely going to have conversations about, hey, listen, you go out as a first or second year apprentice, and next thing you know, you got an $800 truck payment. Don't do that. Save yourself, right, from making that financial decision because lean times can come. And now you're saddled with a truck payment or whatever that you didn't necessarily need. You wanted, and I'm not saying that you can't have your wants. And these are things that we'll have conversations about. And so I would, the financial piece of things, it's going to be one of those things that for those of you who may listen and may be looking for resources to point others to, we want to create this resource. I want to have that conversation so you can go forward too. As maybe you look in the back catalog, there will be monologue podcasts coming out too. So where the financial piece of things is going to happen is going to be a multi-episode conversation, probably an ongoing one, quite frankly, with a friend of mine who is he's a licensed financial professional, as I said, but he's also a union iron worker. There will also be the monologue podcast where I sit and I just articulate, a principle or something like that. And one of the things that you're going to see, probably in 2026, I think, is you're going to see me take what I have effectively called the leadership series on the website. As it sits right now, it's planned for 19 different articles. They read in succession. And I want to turn at least those 19 into a series of podcast episodes. And it's very likely that they're going to be monologues. Nothing wrong with that. And I am excited about this because the leadership series that we're going to roll out is very focused on the trades, and it's born, anecdotally out of my own personal experience after 23, 24 years of being in. And we're going to, navigate through, and you can always respond, right? Hey, can you expand on this? You might even help me expand into my leadership series some more. So the monologue series, like from the leadership perspective, will continue. I'm also looking to kick off, expand what I think is a very valuable series, and that's called the What series. So I have intentions to put out like exploring what is propaganda and what is, I've done already, like what is a union, but expanding that series as well, because I've had multiple potential conversations with a news organization that wants to be able to publish some of the content that we produce here on on their website. And so that's a possibility as well. So there's a lot more coming in the works that we've got going on. So I'm glad that you're coming back and listening. Share alike, tell everybody, and be sure to comment. Also, from a guest perspective, you should anticipate seeing more apprentices. I really like apprentices. After I think I've been an instructor for about 17, 18 years now, something like that. And I always, always, always on the job site advocate for apprentices. I probably will never not advocate for apprentices. I see more than most people are willing to acknowledge the age and skill gap that we have that exists in the industry, and it's self-induced, right? Contractors, the industry itself, we're so busy. We look at this, we look at that. We think we don't have time to train apprentices. No, you don't. You can't afford not to train apprentices. You have to bring up apprentices. You have to pour into them. You have to mentor them. And I want those apprentices to be able to tell me and everybody else their story. Young people may not want to listen to, somebody who's got some gray, but they may listen to someone their own age. And that's why I like apprentices, on a podcast platform. You tell me your story. You tell me how you got in. And then the more that gets out, the more we're battling the trade stigma, the more that you are articulating to other people that are your age that may be top notch. Maybe they have a great work ethic and just didn't know. When I look back to my own time, I did not know. I did not know that there was an avenue to go into the trades. I knew nothing, and I mean nothing about unionism. Nothing. We do not teach it in schools. We do not talk about it. Hell, we don't even promote the trades in school in the first place. It's just taboo. We don't talk about it. So I like having younger people on the platform, and that will continue, to be sure. You can also expect to see. I have individuals that I want to have on this platform who are, they're in positions of authority, they're in positions of leadership, and I hope to have conversations with them and to allow them a space to tell their story and to converse with them and get their perspectives and, just from what part of the country are you in and what are you seeing and what are you hearing and what are the contractors saying? And then have industry professionals like contractors. Why don't you come on this platform and tell me what you think and how are you, not that you can read the tea leaves, but, what are you seeing? How are things going with you? What do you wish that you would have done differently, et cetera? And speaking of what you wish you would have done differently, I want to close this particular podcast episode, kicking back off the podcast, with a special plea, if you will, that if anybody listening is or knows a retiree, send them my way. You can go to www.thewealthyironworker.com, go to the contact page, and that's how you can submit some information to me. I'll try to monitor, the social media presence, like the YouTube and all that kind of stuff. But the best surefire way to get a hold of me is to go to the website and go to the contact page. Now, here's why I want to talk to retirees. Now, when I was younger, I can remember older heads, they would say, they would give me bits of advice. I'm very big on mentoring. Why would I like apprentices on the job and not mentor them? We do them a disservice if we don't do that. So I like to mentor. So I remember old timers, they would give me bits of advice. Well, that bit of advice, it is locked into that time. If it was in 2002 or 2003 or whatever the date was, then it's locked into that time, that specific moment, and it's just between me and that individual. What the podcast medium and, YouTube to augment this, what the podcast medium does is it allows me to be able to talk to, some older people who have a lot of experience and say, hey, ask questions like, what is an example of something that you wish somebody else would have told you when you were younger? And then let them expound upon that. And then when they do, guess what? A lot more people than just them and them and the younger person that they're telling get to learn from that moment. A lot of other people get to learn from that moment. And then if I said, hey, what's something that you wish somebody would have told you when you were younger? Let them explain. And then I said, well, what's something that you were told when you were younger, but you wish you would have listened? And just let them give their experience and let them give their take on things because they have a lot to pass on. And I don't want to just dismiss them and I don't want them to just go to the house and not, I want you to share your experience. And guess what? Just because you're retired does not mean you have nothing left to contribute to this game. You have a lot. We just need to, let's say, find the perfect avenue, if you will, for them to be able to contribute. And they also get to tell their war stories as well. And these things, I believe, are worth all the time to record. I mean, I'll be honest with you. If I had an older retiree on and he told me a set of examples that then two other people, just two, were like, that's great advice. I'm going to implement it into my life. Just two. Just two. It could be one, but I just picked two for whatever reason. It's well worth it. It's well worth it because the best lesson to learn is the lesson from someone else, not the one that you have to go through, like the hard road to go through. If you can learn a lesson from someone else, that's fantastic. And that's what you should be looking to learn. And so that's, kind of part and parcel of what we're trying to do here. And so for the older retirees and the guys that have got some years in, I want to hear what you have to say. There's an awful lot that you can contribute. And I'm really looking forward to seeing, just how much people can glean and learn from you and utilizing the tools of the day, right? To continually mentor. Your mentoring journey should never end. It should only end when your time is up on this earth. I firmly believe that. I think we ought to be continually pouring into the next generation, continually bringing them up, continually educating and helping them out and making all kinds of what I'll say are wise investments into the next generation. And it doesn't just mean money. It means a lot of experience and a lot of, let me just talk to you for a second. Hey, don't do that. Do it like this. And if anybody has the ability to, platform other people and is able to do that, that is a phenomenal thing. I want to help the next generation out. So for those of you, again, that may be close to retirement age or you got a lot of experience and you're interested and or willing, or somebody who is, please go to www.thewealthyironworker.com, go to the contact page, fill it out, let me get a hold of them and talk with them and converse with them and bring that back up. I'd love for them to be able to share their perspective. So now with that, I'm going to end this podcast episode and know that you're going to be hearing from me in the future. I have one set up, hopefully this week, as a matter of fact, with the financial professional. I'm looking forward to that mini series and many, many more podcast episodes to come. So as always, I really appreciate your time, your effort, your energy. Thank you for listening, and please stay safe out there on the job. See you guys later.